I'm Elena Vasquez, 34 years old, standing in my own backyard watching my mother-in-law Diane Hartwell cut into my son's birthday cake with the precision of a surgeon and the warmth of an ice storm. My hands grip the edge of the folding table so hard my knuckles have gone white. Around me, 15 children shriek with birthday party joy, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. My son Tommy, just turning 7, bounces excitedly in his Superman cape, the one I sewed myself from remnants I found at the fabric store. Diane's eyes sweep over the modest decorations, the homemade cake, the toys from the discount store still in their boxes, and I watch her face arrange itself into that particular expression of distaste she's perfected over the years. Then she says it, loud enough for the other mothers to hear, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "Well, I suppose your child looks as cheap as his toys, doesn't he? But what can we expect when his mother has such limited means and even more limited taste?" The conversation around us stops. Someone's phone continues playing a children's song, incongruously cheerful against the sudden silence. My vision blurs at the edges. This is my son's birthday party, in my own home, and this woman has just publicly humiliated not just me, but Tommy. Before I can find words, before I can react, I see my best friend Claudia already pulling out her phone, typing rapidly. She catches my eye across the picnic table and mouths 2 words that will change everything. "Call Marcus." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how I ended up married into the Hartwell family requires understanding who I was before I met David Hartwell, and who his mother Diane believed she was raising him to marry. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Riverside, California, the daughter of immigrant parents who came to this country with nothing but determination and love for each other. My father Miguel worked construction, coming home each evening with dust in his hair and concrete under his fingernails. My mother Rosa cleaned houses during the day and took online accounting courses at night, dreaming of something more. Our home was a small rental on Magnolia Street, nothing fancy, but filled with the smell of my mother's cooking and the sound of my father's laughter. Money was always tight. I wore hand-me-downs from cousins and learned early how to stretch $1. But my parents gave me something more valuable than designer clothes or expensive vacations. They gave me work ethic, resilience, and an unshakable belief that my worth had nothing to do with my bank account. I was good at school, really good. Math came naturally to me, and I loved the clean logic of numbers, the way everything balanced if you just found the right equation. By high school, I was taking college-level courses and helping my mother with her accounting homework. My teachers encouraged me to apply to universities, talking about scholarships and opportunities. I ended up at UC Riverside on a full academic scholarship, the first person in my family to attend a 4-year university. My parents cried at my high school graduation, proud beyond words. I studied finance and accounting, working 3 part-time jobs to cover expenses the scholarship didn't. While other students went to parties and spring break trips, I worked the overnight shift at a campus convenience store, studied in the library until it closed, and sent money home when my parents needed it. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance and immediately landed a position at a mid-sized accounting firm in Orange County. That's where I met David Hartwell. He was a client, or rather, his family's real estate investment company was a client. David would come in for quarterly meetings, always impeccably dressed in suits that cost more than my monthly rent, with an easy confidence that came from never having worried about money. The first time we actually spoke beyond professional pleasantries was when he stayed late one evening after a meeting. I was still at my desk at 7 in the evening, reviewing documents for another client. He appeared with 2 cups of coffee from the expensive shop down the street. "You look like you could use this," he said, his smile genuine and warm. Most people in his position barely notice support staff, but David asked about my work, actually listened to my responses, and seemed impressed by my knowledge. We started talking regularly during his visits to the firm. He was different from what I expected. Yes, he came from wealth. The Hartwell family owned a substantial real estate portfolio across Southern California, but David himself seemed almost embarrassed by it. He talked about wanting to do something meaningful with his business degree, not just manage family assets. 6 months later, he asked me to dinner. I almost said no. The gulf between our backgrounds seemed impossibly wide, but something about his sincerity convinced me to take the chance. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully. David was patient with my hesitations about entering his world of country clubs and charity galas. He seemed to genuinely enjoy the simplicity of our dates, walks on the beach, small restaurants where we could actually talk, movie nights at my tiny apartment. He never made me feel less than because I drove a 10-year-old Honda while he had a BMW. When he took me to meet his family for the first time, 8 months into our relationship, the anxiety nearly paralyzed me. The Hartwell estate in Newport Beach was something from a magazine: sprawling Mediterranean architecture with an ocean view, manicured gardens that required a staff of 3, and an interior that screamed old money and careful curation. Diane Hartwell answered the door herself, though I later learned they had household staff who normally handled such tasks. She was tall, impeccably dressed in cream-colored linen, her blonde hair swept into a flawless chignon, jewelry that was clearly real and clearly expensive. Her handshake was brief and cool. "So you're the accountant," she said, making my profession sound vaguely distasteful. "David tells me you're quite dedicated to your work." It wasn't a compliment. Dinner that evening was an exercise in subtle interrogation. Diane asked questions designed to highlight the differences between us. "Where did your family summer when you were growing up?" "We didn't summer anywhere, Mrs. Hartwell. My father worked construction year-round." "I see. And you attended which prep school before university?" "I went to Riverside Polytechnic High School." "It's a public school." "A public school, of course." Her smile never reached her eyes. David's father Richard was kinder, genuinely interested in my education and career, but it was clear who set the tone in the Hartwell household. Over the next year, as David's and my relationship deepened, Diane's disapproval became less subtle. She suggested other women David should consider, daughters of family friends, women from appropriate backgrounds. She made comments about my clothes, my car, my neighborhood, always framed as helpful observations or innocent questions. When David proposed, presenting me with his grandmother's engagement ring in a moment so perfect I cried, my joy was tempered by the knowledge of what was coming. Diane's reaction to our engagement was controlled but cold. She suggested a long engagement, at least 2 years, to be certain we were compatible. She had ideas about the wedding, naturally, a large society affair at the Newport Beach Country Club with 500 guests. David and I wanted something smaller, more intimate, but Diane steamrolled over our preferences with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. The wedding planning became a battleground. Diane questioned every choice I made that deviated from her vision. She hired a wedding planner without consulting us, she invited people we'd never met, she selected a menu that cost more than my parents earned in 6 months. My mother tried to contribute, offering to make the wedding favors or help with flowers, but Diane dismissed these suggestions with barely concealed horror. "I think it's best if we leave these matters to professionals," she said, managing to make my mother's generosity sound like an embarrassing faux pas. The only battle I won was having my childhood priest officiate alongside the Hartwell's family minister. Even that required David's firm insistence. On our wedding day, surrounded by luxury I'd never imagined, I felt like an imposter in a designer gown I hadn't chosen, celebrating with people who looked at me like I'd won some lottery I didn't deserve. The marriage itself was good, at least at first. David and I moved into a charming but modest house in Costa Mesa, much to Diane's disappointment. She'd wanted us in Newport Beach, preferably in a property she'd selected. David worked for Hartwell Investments but maintained some independence. I continued at my firm, advancing to senior accountant. We were happy building our life together, separate from his family's expectations. Then I got pregnant. The news filled me with joy and terror in equal measure. I was ready to be a mother, eager even, but I knew this child would become another battlefield between me and Diane. When we told David's parents, Diane's face lit up in a way I'd never seen. "Finally, a Hartwell heir," she said, already discussing private schools and trust funds before we'd even confirmed the due date. My pregnancy was healthy but challenging. Morning sickness lasted well into the 2nd trimester, and I worked up until 2 weeks before my due date, ignoring Diane's pointed comments about stress affecting the baby. Tommy arrived on a Wednesday morning in March, perfect and healthy, with David's dark hair and my brown eyes. Holding him for the first time, I felt a fierce protectiveness rise in me. This child would know he was loved for exactly who he was, not for who anyone expected him to be. Diane arrived at the hospital with an enormous flower arrangement and an even larger agenda. She'd already researched nannies, selected a pediatrician from the family's circle, and had opinions about everything from feeding schedules to nursery decor. When I mentioned plans to breastfeed and return to work after maternity leave, her disapproval was palpable. "Hartwell children have always had proper care," she said, proper care meaning nannies and staying home, activities I couldn't afford even if I wanted them. The first few years of Tommy's life established the pattern that would define our relationship with Diane. She showered him with expensive gifts, designer clothes he'd outgrow in months, educational toys that cost hundreds of dollars, all while making subtle digs about what David and I provided. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She insisted on certain preschools, specific activities, and had very firm ideas about how a Hartwell child should be raised. David tried to run interference, but his mother had decades of practice manipulating situations to her preference. When Tommy was 4, my father Miguel suffered a serious injury on a construction site. The accident left him unable to work for 6 months, draining my parents' small savings. David and I helped financially, stretching our budget to cover their rent and medical expenses insurance didn't pay. It meant cutting back on extras, shopping more carefully, postponing some home repairs we'd planned. Diane noticed immediately. When she visited and saw we'd canceled the lawn service to save money, her comments were surgical. "I suppose we all must make choices about what we prioritize," she said, examining our slightly overgrown grass with distaste. "Some people maintain standards regardless of circumstances." The implication was clear. If I weren't sending money to my parents, if I came from a family with resources, we wouldn't be in this position. David defended me, defending us, but the damage was done. Every financial decision became evidence of my inadequacy in Diane's eyes. As Tommy grew older, the criticism shifted to include him. He attended public school because we believed in public education and because the private schools Diane preferred cost more than our mortgage. This became another source of disappointment for her. She questioned his curriculum, his teachers, his classmates from ordinary families. When Tommy showed interest in soccer rather than tennis or golf, Diane sighed about missed opportunities for proper athletic development. Last year, when Tommy was 6, David's father Richard passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The loss devastated David and shifted something fundamental in the family dynamics. Without Richard's tempering presence, Diane's controlling tendencies amplified. She became more critical, more demanding, inserting herself into our lives with increasing aggression. She'd show up unannounced, let herself in with the key David had given her for emergencies, and rearrange our lives to suit her preferences. The inheritance situation complicated everything further. Richard's will left the bulk of his estate to Diane, with trust funds for David and his sister Patricia. But control of Hartwell investments went to David, a decision Diane clearly resented. She'd expected to maintain control or at least have equal say in business decisions. Instead, she found herself with wealth but diminished influence. This brings me to Tommy's 7th birthday party, the event that would finally bring everything to a head. I'd spent weeks planning it, determined to give my son a celebration filled with joy and love, even if we couldn't afford the elaborate affairs Diane thought appropriate. I transformed our backyard with homemade decorations, streamers I'd stayed up late cutting and hanging, balloons I'd inflated myself until I was dizzy. The cake was my creation, 3 layers of chocolate with buttercream frosting, decorated with Superman logos I'd painstakingly piped on. I was proud of it, proud of what I'd created with limited resources but unlimited love. I'd invited Tommy's school friends, a dozen children from his first grade class, normal kids from normal families. I'd organized games, pinned the cape on Superman, a scavenger hunt with small prizes from the party store. The gifts I'd purchased for Tommy were carefully chosen, toys he'd actually play with from Target and Walmart, not expensive items meant to impress others. David helped me set everything up that morning, stringing lights, arranging tables, testing the speakers for the playlist I'd created. We were a team, working together to make our son's day special. When Diane arrived, an hour before the party officially started, she surveyed the scene with an expression I'd learned to dread. She wore white linen despite the outdoor setting, her hair perfect, makeup flawless, radiating disapproval from every pore. "Where are the caterers?" she asked, examining the table of homemade snacks I'd prepared. "Surely you didn't make all this yourself?" "I did," I replied evenly. "Tommy loves my cooking." Diane picked up a homemade cookie, studying it like evidence in a trial. "How quaint," she said, setting it down without tasting it. "I suppose we work with what we have." The party started well despite her presence. The children arrived in an explosion of noise and excitement, Tommy's face lighting up as his friends surrounded him with birthday wishes and small wrapped presents. The games went smoothly. The kids laughed and ran and played with the unself-conscious joy only children possess. I watched my son, happy and loved, and felt pride swell in my chest. Then came time for cake and presents. The children gathered around the picnic table we'd covered with a Superman tablecloth. I brought out the cake I'd worked so hard on, 7 candles flickering on top. Tommy's eyes went wide with delight. "Mom, you made Superman," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "This is the best cake ever." Before we could sing, Diane stepped forward with a large box wrapped in expensive paper, designer ribbon cascading down the sides. "I thought perhaps the birthday boy should open his grandmother's gift first," she announced, loud enough for all the parents who'd stayed to hear. She always did this, made moments about her generosity, about what she could provide that we couldn't. Tommy opened the elaborate packaging to reveal an expensive remote control car, the kind sold in specialty toy stores, easily costing $200 or more. The other children oohed appreciatively. Then Tommy, sweet thoughtful Tommy, turned to the pile of gifts from his friends. He pulled out a package wrapped in newspaper comics, from his best friend Marcus, whose single mother worked 2 jobs. Inside was a small action figure, maybe $10 from the discount store. Tommy's face lit up even brighter than it had for the expensive car. "Marcus, this is so cool," he said with genuine enthusiasm. "I've wanted this one." "Thank you." I watched Diane's face harden. She looked at the modest gifts, at the children from ordinary families, at the homemade decorations and discount store party favors, and something shifted in her expression. The disdain became weaponized. As I prepared to cut the cake, Diane stepped closer, her voice carrying to the nearby parents. "Elena, dear," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I've been meaning to talk to you about Tommy's appearance. Have you considered investing in better clothing for him? Children can be so cruel about these things." I felt my face flush. Tommy wore jeans and a t-shirt, clean and comfortable, with the Superman cape I'd made. He looked like exactly what he was, a happy 7-year-old boy. "I think he looks perfect," I said quietly, trying not to make a scene. Diane laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Perfect?" She examined Tommy critically, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I suppose your child looks as cheap as his toys, doesn't he? But what can we expect when his mother has such limited means and even more limited taste?" The world stopped. The mothers nearby froze, conversations dying mid-sentence. One of the dads looked horrified. Tommy's smile faltered as he registered the adults' tension, not understanding the words but feeling their weight. My hands shook as I set down the cake knife. 7 years of subtle jabs, condescending comments, and thinly veiled insults had built to this moment. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about my child. This woman had just called my son cheap at his own birthday party. Before I could find words through the rage and hurt, I saw Claudia moving toward me. Claudia Rivera had been my best friend since college, the sister I'd chosen. She'd stood beside me through every Hartwell family drama, offering advice, support, and when necessary, connections. You see, Claudia was a paralegal at one of the most prestigious family law firms in Orange County, and her boss Marcus Chen was known for 2 things: brilliance in family law and an absolute intolerance for bullies. Claudia pulled out her phone, typing rapidly, her face set in determined lines. She caught my eye and mouthed 2 words. "Call Marcus." In that moment, I understood. This ended now. I'd spent 7 years trying to be enough for this woman, trying to prove my worth, accepting her abuse to keep peace in my marriage. But she'd crossed a line attacking my child. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and called the number Claudia had texted me. Marcus Chen answered on the second ring. "Elena," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Claudia just messaged me. Tell me what happened." I walked away from the party, into our house, and in a voice that shook with anger and hurt, I told him everything. The years of verbal abuse, the constant criticism, the way Diane undermined my parenting and marriage. And then I told him what she just said about Tommy. There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed, acquiring an edge I'd never heard before. "Elena, I need you to do exactly as I say. First, do you have any witnesses to what just happened?" "About a dozen parents heard her," I said. "Most of them are still here." "Good. Second question, and this is important. Does Diane have any formal grandparents' rights established through the courts?" "No, David and I never saw the need." "Excellent. Now, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make some calls. You're going to go back out there, finish your son's birthday party, and act as normal as possible. Can you do that?" "I don't know if I can face her," I admitted. "You can," Marcus said firmly. "Because in approximately 90 minutes, I'm going to arrive at your home to have a conversation with Diane Hartwell that she will never forget." "And Elena?" He paused. "What she said about your son. That was a mistake that's going to cost her dearly." I returned to the backyard on shaking legs. Diane sat in one of our lawn chairs, sipping lemonade as though she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of a children's party. The other parents were doing their best to pretend nothing had happened, but their discomfort was palpable. Claudia appeared at my side, squeezing my hand. "He's coming," she whispered. "Just hold on." David emerged from inside where he'd been getting more ice. He took one look at my face, at his mother's satisfied expression, at the awkward tension among the guests, and his jaw tightened. "What happened?" he demanded. "Your mother," I started, but couldn't finish. One of the other mothers, Jessica, spoke up. "Mr. Hartwell, I think you should know what your mother just said about your son." As Jessica recounted Diane's words, I watched David's face transform. He'd defended his mother before, made excuses, tried to smooth things over. But this was different. This was Tommy. "Mom," David said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I think you should leave." Diane stood gracefully, unruffled. "Don't be dramatic, David. I simply made an observation. Children need guidance and proper standards." "You insulted my son at his birthday party," David said, louder now. "You called him cheap." She shrugged elegantly. "Truth can be uncomfortable. Perhaps if you'd married someone more suitable, someone from an appropriate background, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The words hung in the air. There it was, finally said plainly. All the years of subtle implications crystallized into open disdain. I wasn't suitable. I would never be suitable. And now my son was paying the price for my inadequacy. "I will not leave," Diane continued. "This is family business, and as Tommy's grandmother, I have every right to be concerned about his upbringing and presentation." That's when I saw the car pull up to our curb. Marcus Chen emerged, immaculate in a tailored suit despite it being a Saturday afternoon. He carried a leather briefcase, and his expression was professional and absolutely ruthless. Behind him emerged another man I recognized from Claudia's firm, a senior partner named William Cho who specialized in restraining orders and harassment cases. "Good afternoon," Marcus said pleasantly as he entered our backyard, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm Marcus Chen, Elena's attorney. And you must be Diane Hartwell. We need to have a conversation." Diane's expression flickered with surprise before settling back into cool composure. She examined Marcus with the same dismissive assessment she'd given me the first time we met, taking in his expensive suit with a slight nod of approval before her eyes hardened again. "I don't believe we need attorneys at a child's birthday party," she said, her voice carrying that particular aristocratic tone that suggested Marcus was being terribly gauche. "This is a family matter." "That's precisely why I'm here," Marcus replied smoothly, setting his briefcase on our picnic table with deliberate care. "Family matters involving harassment, defamation, and emotional abuse are exactly my specialty." He turned to the remaining parents who were watching this unfold with wide eyes. "I apologize for the disruption to the celebration. If you could give us a few moments of privacy, I'd greatly appreciate it." The parents didn't need to be asked twice. They gathered their children quickly, offering hurried goodbyes to Tommy and sympathetic glances my way. Jessica paused long enough to squeeze my shoulder and whisper that she'd heard everything and would be happy to provide a statement if needed. Within minutes, our backyard had emptied except for Marcus, William, Diane, David, Claudia, Tommy who was confused but still clutching his new action figure, and me. "David," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I know this is unexpected, but Elena called me about an incident that occurred here today. Given the severity and the presence of multiple witnesses, I felt it was important to address this immediately." David shook his hand, looking between Marcus and his mother with growing understanding. "What exactly is happening here?" "What's happening," William Cho spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying authority, "is that your mother committed actionable defamation against a minor child in the presence of multiple witnesses. She also engaged in a pattern of harassment against your wife that, based on what Marcus has shared with me, has been ongoing for years." Diane laughed, the sound sharp and derisive. "This is absurd. I made a comment about my grandson's appearance. Surely I'm entitled to my opinions about my own family." Marcus opened his briefcase and extracted a small recording device. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm going to record this conversation for legal purposes. You're welcome to have your own attorney present, though based on what I'm about to explain, you might want to listen first before making any decisions." "I don't need an attorney," Diane said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong. Let me outline what occurred here today," Marcus continued, ignoring her protestation. "You arrived at a child's birthday party and made multiple disparaging comments about the celebration your daughter-in-law had organized. Then, in the presence of approximately 12 witnesses including several other parents and the birthday child himself, you stated, and I quote, 'I suppose your child looks as cheap as his toys, doesn't he? But what can we expect when his mother has such limited means and even more limited taste?' Is that an accurate representation of your words?" Diane's face remained impassive. "I said something along those lines, yes. As I mentioned, I'm concerned about my grandson's presentation and upbringing." "Concerned," Marcus repeated. "Let's talk about what your concern constitutes legally. First, we have defamation of a minor. You made false and damaging statements about a 7-year-old child's character and appearance in a public setting. Second, we have intentional infliction of emotional distress against both the child and his mother. Third, and this is what interests me most professionally, we have a clear pattern of harassment that Elena has documented over the past 7 years." "I haven't documented anything," I said quietly, confused. "Claudia has," Marcus said, nodding to my friend. "Every time you called her upset after an encounter with Diane, every time you shared what had been said to you, Claudia kept notes. Dates, specific quotes, witnesses when applicable. She brought me a file 6 months ago when she was concerned about escalation. Today's incident confirms her concerns were warranted." I looked at Claudia in amazement. She'd been building a case without me even knowing, protecting me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. "This is preposterous," Diane said, but I detected the first hint of uncertainty in her voice. "I'm Tommy's grandmother. I have rights." "Actually," William interjected, "in California, grandparents have very limited rights, and those rights can be terminated entirely if the grandparent poses a risk to the child's emotional well-being. What you said today, in front of that child, constitutes such a risk." Tommy had been sitting quietly on David's lap, and at the mention of his name, he looked up. "Daddy, why is Grandma in trouble?" Did she say something bad? David's arms tightened around his son. We're just having a grown-up conversation, buddy. Why don't you go inside and wash up? We'll have cake soon. After Tommy reluctantly went inside, David turned to his mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold fury mixed with what looked like grief. Did you really say that about my son? About Tommy? Diane's composure cracked slightly. David, you're being manipulated by these people. I was simply trying to help. The boy needs proper guidance, proper things, and your wife clearly isn't capable of providing them. Stop talking, Marcus said sharply. Every word you say right now is making this worse for you. He pulled out a document from his briefcase. This is a cease and desist letter. It formally requires you to stop all contact with Elena and Tommy, pending a formal hearing. If you violate these terms, we will immediately file for a restraining order. You can't keep me from my grandson, Diane said, her voice rising for the first time. I have every right to see him. You have no rights, William corrected. None. California law is very clear on this. Grandparents can petition for visitation rights only under specific circumstances, and even then, the court prioritizes the parent's decisions and the child's best interests. Given what occurred today, combined with the documented pattern of harassment, I can guarantee you that no judge would grant you unsupervised access to this child. David stood abruptly, moving away from his mother. Is this true? All of it? The harassment, the documented incidents? I nodded, tears finally spilling over. I didn't want to make you choose between us. I kept trying to handle it, to be better, to somehow earn her approval so our family could be peaceful. 7 years, David said, the words coming out strangled. 7 years of this and you never told me the full extent? You defended her, I said quietly. Every time I tried to talk to you about it, you said she meant well, that she just wanted what was best for us, that I was being too sensitive. The silence that followed was devastating. I watched David realize what his inability to see his mother clearly had cost me, cost us, cost our son. Diane stood, gathering her purse with shaking hands. This is not over. I will not be kept from my family by some ambulance-chasing lawyer and a girl who was never good enough for my son in the first place. There it is, Marcus said quietly. Please, Mrs. Hartwell, keep talking. You're making my case stronger with every word. I'm leaving, Diane announced. David, when you come to your senses and remember where you come from, where your loyalties should lie, call me. My loyalties, David said, his voice breaking, are with my wife and son. The family I chose and built. Not the family that just called my 7-year-old child cheap at his own birthday party. Diane's face went white, then red. You're going to regret this. All of you. She turned to me, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it took my breath away. You think you've won something here? You've destroyed this family. David will realize eventually that you've poisoned him against his own mother, and when he does, you'll have nothing. Actually, Marcus said, pulling out his phone, she'll have this recording of you threatening her and making additional defamatory statements. Please, continue. You're doing excellent work building our harassment case. Diane turned and walked toward the gate leading to our front yard, her posture rigid with fury. At the gate, she paused and looked back. The house, the money, the lifestyle you enjoy, David, all of it comes from Hartwell Resources. From me, now that your father is gone. Remember that when you're choosing sides. Is that a threat to financially manipulate your son? William asked, making notes on his phone. Because that's another issue we can address legally. After Diane left, the silence in our backyard was oppressive. Tommy's birthday cake sat untouched, the candles burned down to nothing. Streamers fluttered in the breeze, cheerful and incongruous against the tension. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. Elena, you did the right thing calling me. This needed to happen. She called my son cheap, I said, the words finally breaking through the shock. At his birthday party, in front of his friends, she called him cheap. I know, Marcus said gently. And she's going to face consequences for that. William and I are going to draw up a formal complaint documenting today's incident and the pattern of harassment. We'll file for a restraining order first thing Monday morning. What does that mean exactly? David asked, his voice hollow. It means your mother will be legally prohibited from contacting Elena or Tommy, William explained. She won't be able to come to this house, call, text, email, or approach them in public places. Violations will result in criminal charges. And me? David asked. Can she contact me? That's your choice, Marcus said. We can include you in the order if you want, or you can maintain contact with her separately. That's a personal decision. David looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time seeing the toll these years had taken. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have protected you better. I should have seen this. You love your mother, I said. I understand that. I never wanted to take her away from you. She took herself away, Marcus interjected firmly, when she chose cruelty over kindness. When she prioritized her own prejudices over her grandson's well-being. This is on her, not on either of you. After Marcus and William left with promises to be in touch Monday morning, after Claudia helped me clean up the abandoned party, after we finally cut the cake and sang to Tommy in our kitchen with just the three of us, I sat on our back porch and let myself cry. David sat beside me, not saying anything, just being present in his grief and shock. Inside, Tommy played with his new toys, oblivious to how his birthday had become a turning point. His laughter drifted through the open window, pure and untainted by adult complications. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. Marcus called Monday morning to confirm they'd filed the restraining order petition. A hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, a temporary order was in place prohibiting Diane from contact. She violated it within 12 hours. The first text came to David's phone late Monday night. This is insane. You're letting that woman destroy our family. Call off your lawyers and let's discuss this rationally. David showed me the message, his hands shaking slightly. She doesn't get it. She still thinks she's the victim here. The second message came an hour later. I've spoken to my attorney. You should know that I can make things very difficult for you at Hartwell Investments. Your father may have given you control, but I still have considerable influence with the board. Now she's threatening his job, I said, reading over his shoulder. Because of course she is. David forwarded both messages to Marcus without responding to his mother. Within an hour, Marcus had filed an emergency motion documenting the violations. The judge issued a strongly worded warning to Diane through her newly retained attorney, a high-priced family lawyer named Gerald Summers who apparently specialized in wealthy clients who believed rules didn't apply to them. Tuesday brought flowers. An enormous arrangement delivered to our house with a card that read, "For my dear grandson Tommy. Grandmother loves you even when others try to keep us apart." She sent flowers to a 7-year-old with a guilt trip message, Claudia said when I called her in disbelief. That's a special kind of manipulation. Marcus added the flower delivery to the growing documentation of violations. Wednesday morning, Diane appeared at Tommy's school during drop-off. I was walking him to his classroom when I saw her standing near the office, clearly waiting. The moment she spotted us, she started moving in our direction. "Tommy," she called out. "Sweetheart, come give Grandma a hug." Tommy looked confused, glancing between Diane and me. "But Mom said we're not supposed to see Grandma right now because she said mean things." Out of the mouths of children came the simple truth. Diane's face hardened as she processed her grandson's words, the rejection clear and public. I scooped Tommy up and walked quickly to his classroom, my heart pounding. Once he was safely inside with his teacher, I called Marcus. "She's at the school," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tried to approach Tommy. "Stay there," Marcus said. "I'm calling the police and the school administration. Don't leave until I tell you it's safe." Within 20 minutes, a police officer arrived and escorted Diane from the school property. The principal, Mrs. Morrison, met with me afterward and immediately placed Diane on a banned persons list. If she attempts to enter school grounds again, we'll have her arrested for trespassing, Mrs. Morrison said firmly. Your son's safety is our priority. The hearing for the permanent restraining order was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Marcus spent Wednesday and Thursday preparing, compiling witness statements from the parents at Tommy's party, organizing Claudia's documented notes from 7 years of incidents, and gathering evidence of the post-order violations. Thursday evening, David's sister Patricia called. She'd been traveling in Europe and had just heard about everything from mutual family friends. Is it true? Patricia asked. Did Mom really call Tommy cheap at his birthday party? Word for word, David confirmed, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I believe it. God help me, I absolutely believe it. You know, she said something similar about my kids once. Called them unrefined because they preferred playing in the dirt to attending her garden party. I laughed it off at the time, but it hurt. It really hurt. Why didn't you say anything? David asked. Because she's our mother, Patricia said simply. Because I'd spent my whole life trying to please her and failing, and it was easier to pretend her cruelty was just her being honest. But what she did to Elena and Tommy, that's different. That's unforgivable. Patricia flew back Friday morning and appeared at the courthouse with us, sitting on our side of the courtroom in a visible show of support. Diane arrived with Gerald Summers and an entourage that included several family friends who apparently were there to testify to her character. The hearing was held before Judge Rebecca Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a reputation for cutting through pretense. She reviewed the filed documents, listened to opening statements, and then called witnesses. Marcus presented our case methodically. He played the recording of Diane's words at the party. He introduced written statements from 3 parents who'd witnessed the incident, including Jessica, who appeared in person to testify. Mrs. Hartwell looked at that little boy and called him cheap, Jessica said, her voice shaking with emotion. I have kids. I know how hard it is to give them good parties on a budget. What Elena created was full of love. What that woman said was designed to hurt, to humiliate, and she succeeded. Next came Claudia, who presented her documented timeline of harassment. She read excerpts from her notes, specific incidents spanning 7 years. Each one alone might have seemed minor, but compiled together, they painted a picture of systematic emotional abuse. December 2019, Diane comments at family dinner that Elena's contribution of homemade tamales is charming but not really appropriate for a Hartwell gathering. Suggests Elena stick to store-bought items in the future. Elena calls me crying, feeling like nothing she does is ever good enough. March 2020, Diane tells Elena in front of family friends that her pregnancy weight gain is excessive and unflattering. Comments that Hartwell women maintain their figures even during pregnancy. Elena develops anxiety about eating in front of David's family. November 2020, Diane criticizes Elena's parenting choices regarding breastfeeding, calling it provincial and suggesting formula is more appropriate for professional women. Elena questions her own parenting instincts. The list went on. And on. I watched Diane's face as Claudia read, seeing the reality of her actions compiled and presented as evidence. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Gerald Summers tried to dismiss it all as family disagreements, normal tensions between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law blown out of proportion. But when Judge Martinez asked him to explain the birthday party incident, he struggled. My client may have been insensitive in her phrasing, he said carefully, but her intentions were good. She's concerned about her grandson's upbringing and wants to ensure he has the advantages she can provide. By calling him cheap? Judge Martinez asked, her eyebrows raised. That's your argument for good intentions? When it was Diane's turn to testify, she took the stand with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. She explained her concerns about Tommy's education, his clothes, his exposure to appropriate social circles. She described her attempts to guide Elena toward better choices, to help her son's family maintain proper standards. You keep using words like proper and appropriate, Judge Martinez observed. What exactly do you mean by those terms? I mean the standards befitting a Hartwell, Diane said. My grandson should attend the right schools, wear quality clothing, associate with children from good families. And you don't believe his current life meets these standards? The judge asked. Frankly, no, Diane said. My daughter-in-law comes from a very different background. She means well, but she simply doesn't understand how to raise a child in our social sphere. Did it occur to you, Judge Martinez asked, her voice cooling, that perhaps your son chose a different life than the one you envisioned? That he might value different things than you do? He's made choices, Diane said carefully, that I believe he may come to regret. As his mother, I have a responsibility to guide him back to what's right. What's right, the judge repeated. She looked at the documents before her. Mrs. Hartwell, you told a 7-year-old child that he looked cheap. Can you explain to me how that statement constitutes guidance? I never said it to the child directly, Diane protested. I was speaking to his mother about my concerns. In front of him, at his birthday party, Judge Martinez clarified. Where he could hear you. Where his friends could hear you. Where multiple adults witnessed you publicly humiliating both him and his mother. I may have been more blunt than necessary, Diane admitted, but someone needed to address these issues. Did you consider addressing them privately? The judge asked. Perhaps speaking to your son without an audience? I've tried that approach, Diane said. He's under his wife's influence. She's isolated him from family, made him believe we're the problem rather than helping him see reality. She's isolated him? Marcus interjected. Your Honor, may I present evidence of isolation? He pulled out David's phone records. Mr. Hartwell has called or texted his mother an average of 4 times per week for the past year. They've had weekly family dinners nearly every Sunday. The only isolation that occurred was when Mrs. Hartwell was served with this restraining order. The judge examined the records. These don't indicate isolation, Mrs. Hartwell. They indicate regular, consistent contact. What changed was your son's willingness to accept your treatment of his wife and child. For the first time, I saw Diane's composure truly crack. Her hands trembled as she gripped the witness stand. I've given my son everything. I've supported him, educated him, provided opportunities most people only dream of. And this is how he repays me? By choosing her over his own mother? He didn't choose anyone over anyone, Judge Martinez said quietly. He chose to protect his child from harm. That's what parents do, Mrs. Hartwell. They protect their children, even from family members who hurt them. The final piece of evidence Marcus presented was a recording of the voicemail Diane had left on David's phone the night before the hearing. I'd never heard it. David had played it for Marcus but couldn't bring himself to play it for me. David, Diane's voice came through the courtroom speakers, cold and venomous. I want you to know that you're destroying everything your father worked for. This company, this family, this legacy. All of it will crumble because you chose to marry beneath you and now you're allowing her to poison you against your own mother. When you lose everything, and you will, don't come crying to me. You've made your choice. Live with it. Judge Martinez sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. She looked at Diane for a long moment. Mrs. Hartwell, I've been on this bench for 17 years. I've heard a lot of family cases, a lot of disputes, a lot of people who believe their love gives them license to hurt. But what I've heard today troubles me deeply. She shuffled through the papers before her. You've demonstrated a pattern of harassment spanning years. You've made it clear that you view your daughter-in-law as inferior because of her economic background. You've publicly humiliated a child at his own birthday party. And even after being served with a protective order, you've violated it multiple times, showing a fundamental disrespect for legal boundaries and your grandson's emotional safety. But Your Honor, Gerald Summers started. Judge Martinez held up her hand. I'm not finished. She turned back to Diane. What concerns me most is your complete lack of remorse or insight. You've sat here today and justified every harmful action as being for their own good. You've positioned yourself as the victim when you're clearly the aggressor. And most troubling, you've threatened your own son's livelihood when he dared to stand up to you. That was a private conversation, Diane said. Which you left on a recorded line, the judge noted. The restraining order is granted, Mrs. Hartwell. You are prohibited from contacting Elena Vasquez, Tommy Hartwell, or appearing at their residence, the child's school, or any location where you know them to be present. This order will remain in effect for 3 years, at which point it can be reviewed if you've completed anger management and family therapy. 3 years? Diane gasped. You're keeping me from my grandson for 3 years? I'm protecting a child from emotional harm, Judge Martinez corrected. And frankly, Mrs. Hartwell, if you'd shown even a hint of understanding about why your behavior was wrong, I might have been more lenient. But you haven't. You still believe you're entitled to treat people cruelly in the name of standards and propriety. She signed the order with a flourish. We're adjourned. As we filed out of the courtroom, I heard Diane's voice rising behind us, Gerald Summers trying to calm her. This isn't over. They can't keep me from my family. I have rights. Outside, Patricia hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have stood up to her years ago. We all should have. David stood apart from us, staring at the courthouse building with an expression of profound loss. He'd protected us, chosen us, but the cost was the relationship with his mother, however toxic it had been. Marcus approached with a satisfied expression. That went better than I hoped. The judge was absolutely not having any of her justifications. What happens now? I asked. Now, Marcus said, she has to stay away. If she violates the order, she'll face criminal charges. If she continues to harass you through third parties or attempts any financial manipulation against David's position at the company, we have grounds for additional legal action. The drive home was quiet. Tommy was at Patricia's house with her kids, spared from witnessing the courtroom drama. David's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. I lost my mother today, he said finally. I know she was cruel, I know she was wrong, but she's still my mother and I lost her. You set boundaries, I corrected gently. You protected your son. That's not loss, David. That's love. But it felt like loss. For both of us. The family David had known his whole life was fractured beyond repair. The relationship with his mother that had defined so much of his identity was severed, at least for now. When we picked up Tommy from Patricia's house, he ran to us with his usual enthusiasm. Did you have a good day? He asked. Can we have leftover birthday cake for dessert? That night, after Tommy was asleep, David and I sat in our living room. The house was quiet except for the tick of the clock on the mantel, a wedding gift from David's father. Do you think I did the right thing? David asked. Supporting the restraining order against my own mother? I took his hand. You did what a father does. You protected your child from someone who hurt him. That's always right, even when it's hard. She'll never forgive this, he said. Never. Maybe not, I agreed. But that's her choice, not yours. You offered her a relationship built on respect. She rejected it. That's on her. The first few months after the restraining order were tense. Diane tested the boundaries through intermediaries. Family friends would call David with messages from her, concerned questions about whether reconciliation was possible. Each time, Marcus documented it and sent warning letters through Gerald Summers. The most brazen attempt came from Diane's bridge club president, a woman named Margaret who showed up at our door one Saturday morning. I'm here on behalf of Diane, Margaret announced when I answered. She wants you to know she's sorry for any misunderstanding and would like to discuss bringing the family back together. There was no misunderstanding, I said calmly. There was clear, documented abuse. And anything she wants to communicate needs to go through our attorney. Don't you think you're being rather dramatic? Margaret asked, her tone condescending. Family disagreements are normal. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive. She called my 7-year-old son cheap at his birthday party, I said, watching Margaret's face change as the reality hit her. There was no disagreement. There was cruelty. Now please leave before I call the police for attempted circumvention of a restraining order. Margaret left quickly, and Marcus sent another warning letter. After that, the indirect contact attempt stopped. Work became complicated for David. True to her threat, Diane used her influence with the board to make things difficult. She couldn't remove him as CEO, that was secured in Richard's ironclad will, but she could create obstacles. Business decisions that should have been straightforward became battles. Meetings became hostile. Several board members who were old family friends sided with Diane, viewing David's actions as disrespectful to his mother. The situation came to a head at a quarterly board meeting 6 months after the restraining order. David came home that evening looking exhausted and defeated. "She's calling for a vote of no confidence," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "She's convinced half the board that I'm too emotionally unstable to run the company effectively." "Can she do that?" I asked, fear rising. "Legally?" "No, not really. Dad's will is clear. But she can make running the company impossible. She can turn it into such a hostile environment that I'll want to leave." We sat together on the couch, the weight of it all pressing down. Everything Diane had predicted was coming true, not because we were wrong, but because she was making it happen. The punishment for daring to stand up to her was losing everything. "What do you want to do?" I asked David. "Because I'll support whatever you decide." He was quiet for a long time. "I built something there," he finally said. "After Dad died, I worked hard to modernize the company, to make it more ethical, more sustainable. I don't want to walk away from that." "Then don't," I said firmly. "Fight for it." The next morning, David called Marcus. "We need to talk about Diane's behavior at Hartwell Investments. This has gone beyond family conflict. This is illegal interference with business operations." Marcus listened carefully to David's explanation of how Diane was using her board position to create a hostile work environment, essentially retaliating against David for the restraining order. "That's employment law territory," Marcus said. "But I know someone who specializes in this. Give me an hour." The someone turned out to be Sarah Kim, a fierce employment attorney who'd made her name taking down powerful people who thought they were untouchable. She met with David that afternoon, reviewed the documentation of Diane's interference, and smiled. "Your mother made a critical error," Sarah said. "She's using her position on the board to retaliate against you for exercising your legal rights. That's textbook illegal retaliation. We can sue both her personally and Hartwell Investments." The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the family and business community. The complaint laid out everything: Diane's harassment of our family, the restraining order, and her subsequent abuse of her board position to punish David. It demanded her removal from the board and significant financial damages. Gerald Summers, Diane's attorney, called within 24 hours requesting a meeting. We met in a neutral conference room with all attorneys present. Diane sat across from us, and for the first time, she looked her age. The confidence and superiority had given way to something that looked almost like fear. "My client is prepared to step down from the board," Gerald said without preamble. "In exchange, we'd like the retaliation lawsuit dropped and a mutual agreement to cease all legal hostilities. Is your client prepared to acknowledge the harm she's caused?" Marcus asked. "My client maintains that her actions came from a place of concern for her family's well-being," Gerald said carefully. "So that's a no," Sarah said flatly. She turned to Diane directly. "Mrs. Hartwell, do you understand that what you did was wrong? Not misguided, not misunderstood, but actually wrong?" Diane's mouth opened and closed. She looked at David, and something passed across her face. Grief, maybe, or the first glimpse of real understanding. "I never meant to hurt Tommy," she said finally, her voice cracking. "That was never my intention." "But you did hurt him," David said quietly. "You called my son cheap at his birthday party. You made him feel small and worthless. Whatever your intentions were, that was the result." A single tear ran down Diane's face, the first display of genuine emotion I'd seen from her. "I thought I was helping. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd see that you could have be better." "Better than what, Mom?" David asked, his own voice breaking. Better than a wife who loves me? Better than a son who's happy and kind? What exactly would be better? Diane had no answer. The silence stretched until Gerald cleared his throat. So, to the proposal. My client will resign from the board immediately, sign a non-compete agreement preventing interference with company operations, and maintain strict adherence to the restraining order. In exchange, you drop the retaliation suit. And? Sarah prompted. There's an end coming, I can feel it. And my client would like to request, Gerald said carefully, the possibility of supervised visitation with her grandson after she completes court-ordered therapy. Not now. Not for at least a year. But eventually, if she demonstrates real change. David looked at me. This was the moment. We could say no, keep her cut off permanently, and probably be legally justified. Or we could leave a door open, barely cracked, for the possibility of redemption. I thought of Tommy, who still asked sometimes why he couldn't see Grandma. I thought of the grandmother I'd lost young and how I'd wished for more time. I thought of forgiveness, not for Diane's sake, but for ours. 1 year minimum of therapy with documented progress, I said. Then we revisit supervised visitation. And I mean supervised, always, with us present. First hint of criticism or inappropriate behavior toward Tommy, it ends permanently. Gerald nodded, making notes. Those terms are acceptable. We signed the agreement 2 weeks later. Diane resigned from the Hartwell Investments board, releasing David to run the company without her interference. The restraining order remained in place, but with the modification that after 1 year of documented therapy, we'd consider supervised visitation. 6 months passed in relative peace. David restructured the board, bringing in new members who shared his vision for the company. Without Diane's constant interference, Hartwell Investments began to thrive under his leadership. Tommy thrived without the constant undercurrent of tension that had defined family gatherings. He grew more confident, more comfortable in his own skin. His second-grade teacher told us he'd become a leader in class, standing up for kids who were being teased about their clothes or lunches. The kindness we tried to teach him was taking root in ways that made my heart ache with pride. I started my own small accounting practice from home, building a client base of small business owners who appreciated my attention to detail and reasonable rates. The work was satisfying in ways corporate accounting never had been. I was helping people like my parents, hardworking folks trying to build something with limited resources. David and I grew closer through the ordeal. The crisis had forced him to examine assumptions he'd carried his whole life about family loyalty and what he owed to whom. He started therapy to work through the complicated grief of losing his mother while she was still alive, the anger at himself for not seeing her cruelty sooner, the guilt of choosing us over her even though he knew it was right. One evening about 9 months after the agreement, David's phone rang. It was Gerald Summers. He put it on speaker so I could hear. Your mother has completed her therapy requirements, Gerald said. Her therapist is willing to provide documentation of significant progress. She's requested that I reach out about beginning supervised visitation with Tommy. My stomach clenched. We'd agreed to this possibility, but the reality of it was terrifying. What if she said something cruel? What if she hurt Tommy again? What if we were making a terrible mistake? What does significant progress mean specifically? David asked. She's completed intensive individual therapy focused on emotional regulation and family dynamics, Gerald explained. She's attended a support group for parents and grandparents working to repair damaged relationships. Her therapist believes she's developed genuine insight into how her behavior was harmful and is committed to different patterns of interaction. We asked for the documentation and spent a week reviewing it with Marcus and our own family therapist. The reports were detailed and, surprisingly, seemed genuine. Diane had apparently spent 9 months doing real psychological work, confronting beliefs about class and worth that had been embedded since her own childhood. Her therapist's final assessment noted that Diane had experienced a fundamental shift in perspective after the birthday party incident. Seeing her grandson's hurt and confused face, combined with losing access to him entirely, had broken through defenses she'd maintained for decades. The work she'd done wasn't performative for our benefit but seemed to be authentic personal transformation. We agreed to one supervised visit at a neutral location, a park near our house where we could leave immediately if needed. The morning of the visit, I was so anxious I couldn't eat breakfast. Tommy was excited but nervous, old enough to remember both good times with his grandmother and the hurt of her last words to him. Diane arrived exactly on time, walking across the park grass toward the picnic table where we waited. She'd aged noticeably in 9 months. Her hair had more gray, her face showed new lines, and she moved with less of the regal bearing I'd always associated with her. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, nothing designer or intended to impress. When she saw Tommy, she stopped several feet away, not rushing forward or demanding affection. "Hello, Tommy," she said quietly. "Thank you for being willing to see me." "Hi, Grandma," Tommy said, pressing closer to David's side. Diane's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I owe you an apology. A real one. What I said at your birthday party was cruel and wrong. You are a wonderful, kind, smart boy, and nothing about you is cheap or less than. I was the one who was wrong, not you. Can you forgive me?" Tommy considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to big questions. "Did you mean it? When you said those things?" "I said words I thought I believed," Diane answered carefully. "But I was wrong about what matters and what makes someone valuable. I've learned a lot since then about being a better person and a better grandmother. If you'll let me try." The visit lasted an hour. Diane asked Tommy about school and listened to his long, enthusiastic explanation of his current favorite video game without once suggesting he should be doing something more refined. She admired drawings he'd made without commenting on the quality of the paper or materials. She was, for the first time in my experience with her, simply present with him without agenda or judgment. When it was time to leave, she thanked us for the opportunity and asked if perhaps we might try again in a few weeks if everyone felt comfortable. Tommy nodded, and we agreed to another visit. Over the next 6 months, we slowly, carefully rebuilt some form of relationship with Diane. The visits increased in frequency and duration. She never came to our house, maintaining that boundary felt important, but we met in parks and eventually at Patricia's home where family gatherings could happen on neutral ground. The change in Diane wasn't complete or perfect. Sometimes I'd see her face tighten when Tommy showed up in clothes from Target or talked about his public school friends. But now, instead of making cutting remarks, she'd take a breath and redirect, asking genuine questions about his interests and experiences. The real test came at Tommy's 8th birthday party. We'd invited Diane, with clear ground rules established beforehand. She could attend, but any inappropriate comments would result in immediate departure and re-evaluation of visitation. She arrived with a modest gift, a book series Tommy had mentioned wanting, and a homemade card she'd made herself. She sat quietly during the party, chatting politely with other parents, and when it came time for cake, she stood back and let us celebrate our son without interference. As the party wound down and Tommy opened presents, he got to Diane's gift and lit up with excitement. "Grandma, these are perfect." "Thank you." He ran over and hugged her spontaneously, and I watched Diane's face crumple with emotion as she held him. Later, as guests were leaving, Diane approached me privately. We'd barely spoken directly in over a year, maintaining distance even as she rebuilt her relationship with Tommy. "Elena," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know I can never fully make up for the years of hurt I caused you. I know sorry isn't nearly enough. But I am sorry. I was wrong about you, about what matters, about everything I thought defined worth and success. You've raised an incredible child with love and values I should have recognized and respected from the beginning." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the justified hurt. But another part, the part that had watched her do genuinely hard work to change, wanted to let it go. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "I appreciate it." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Your son is lucky to have you as his mother. I hope someday I can be the grandmother he deserves." 3 years after that terrible birthday party, our family looks different than anyone could have predicted. David runs Hartwell Investments with vision and integrity, having transformed it into a company his father would be proud of and one that reflects his own values rather than just legacy expectations. I built my accounting practice into something sustainable that allows me to work from home and be present for Tommy. Tommy is thriving, 10 years old now, confident and kind, passionate about soccer and art and helping younger kids at school who need friends. He has a relationship with his grandmother that is warm but boundaried, and he's learned valuable lessons about accountability and change. Diane comes to family dinners now, monthly gatherings at Patricia's house where both families gather. She's different, softer, more interested in listening than controlling. She and I will never be close, but we've found a respectful coexistence built on our shared love for Tommy and David. Sometimes I think about that afternoon in our backyard when my world shattered, when the words that hurt my child forced me to finally draw a line I should have drawn years earlier. I think about Marcus arriving with his briefcase and determination, about Judge Martinez seeing through practice justifications to protect a child, about the courage it took to say enough. The story could have ended differently. Diane could have remained unchanged, bitter and cut off from her family permanently. David could have chosen his mother over us, unable to break free from a lifetime of her influence. We could have accepted the abuse as the price of family peace, teaching Tommy that cruelty from loved ones should be tolerated. But instead, by standing firm, by insisting that love requires respect, we created space for real change. Not easy change or comfortable change, but the kind of transformation that only happens when consequences meet a genuine willingness to grow. My son knows he is valuable exactly as he is, not because of what he owns or where he goes to school or who his family is, but because of his kind heart and curious mind and the person he's becoming. That's worth more than any amount of money or social status could ever provide. And somewhere in that backyard confrontation, in the worst moment of public humiliation I'd ever experienced, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. My own voice, my own worth, my own ability to stand up and say this ends now. Not with anger or revenge, but with clear boundaries and the understanding that protecting my child was more important than keeping peace with someone determined to hurt us. The best gifts sometimes come wrapped in the worst moments. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us our own strength. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing up to a bully leads not just to protection but to transformation for everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.